Welcome to the RSP Cast. This is the quick game for week 9 with Mark Schofield and Matt Waldman. Mark, it's another week of the NFL. We are in the thick of it at the midseason point, and we just got finished with Halloween around the corner here, talking about, I guess, comedic apocalyptic scenarios.
I mean, Matt, we're finding out that perhaps the general manager of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers created a burner account and wrote a 400-page book defended Jameis Winston.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot wrap my mind around that. And we don't know if it's true or not. The evidence that has been posted on YouTube seems pretty compelling. But it's just the most 2019 sports story I think we will come across. And I know the year is coming to a close. There is still time, believe it or not, to best this one. But it's just unbelievable. We've spent, before we hit record, like 15 minutes trying to wrap our heads around that. So I think we're in a pretty good place. We've warmed ourselves up to the point where I think we could have a pretty good installment of the quick game today.
Yeah, exactly. And if I had, I just think to myself, if I had time to write a 400-page book, what would I be writing about it? Well, check with me in April, because that's
right. Exactly.
and
you're not going to write 400 pages just on Jameis Winston?
No, I don't think so. So, but I can say this: if you're hiring Tampa, let me know. I've got some friends who do real estate there, so I'm sure I can find a house. So just wanted to throw that out there. If you're listening, if you're listening, you know who, then you're probably
that account follows me on Twitter, so it might be listening.
If you're listening to me, then I might say you might want to spread that around to other prospects. It might help your team. That's all I can say. And you've made some good picks. You have. So
it's for a kicker in the second round.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So speaking of which, I put out this month's RSP newsletter, usually the lightest newsletter that I do before I do, start to do rankings in December and some of the other ones that I got coming up in November. But I published something I called the no-fly list in this month's newsletter. And it's just basically a list of players that I say you don't want them on your team, NFL-wise or fantasy-wise, for any reason. And maybe extreme circumstances. So I'm just curious, Mark, who would be someone that might make your no-fly list?
Well, I think an easy answer right now for the New England Patriots would be Antonio Brown, given how that situation sort of unfolded. But I'll actually go in a slightly different direction. And everybody knows that I try to be Mr. Quarterback. I try to be the head of the quarterback union. I try to always take a rose-colored glasses approach for the most part. And I've tried to do that over the past 2 years of covering this player week in and week out. But I am done. I am officially done with the Mitchell Trubisky experiment. It is over. There is no recourse. There is no going back. And if Ryan Pace called Bill Belichick up tomorrow and said, you can just have him, period. No, don't do it, Bill. It is not going to come together for him. The mistakes are not being fixed. I'm tired of having to write about him every week. So the Mitchell Trubisky experience for me is kaput. I wrote to get my favorite PFW piece yet was this week when I talked about potential replacements for Mitchell Trubisky. So he's at the top of my no-fly list.
Wow. And you know what? That's right on time too. And I would say this, he certainly was at the top of my list as well, but and for some definitely good reasons that I think we'll discuss a little bit later here, but I'll go ahead and put Marcus Mariota. I'm going to put him on my list. And the reason that he's there is that, this is a guy that I still don't think does a very good job of handling the pocket. And it's just one of those things that he doesn't know when to stop extending a play. And because he's been enabled as an athlete. And I think these are some difficult scenarios that we have with some players, is that, he can read the field reasonably well. He has some issues there that you could live with if he could handle the pocket a little bit better. But he's someone that, I've compared and contrasted him with Tom Brady, with Drew Brees, with some of the better pocket players and how they understand when to get rid of the ball, even if the play isn't going to work out. And he's not someone that understands how to do that. And though he can run fast, he's not always the wisest runner. And so that's a difficulty. And then there's the whole leadership angle. To me, it's like, if you say if Rashard Matthews says the difference between he and Ryan Tannehill is that you lead by example, and basically, or leading by example is what Mariota does. That's just a facet of leadership. That's not a complete leadership style. And if that's your complete leadership style, that means it's missing.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And it's painful because I loved Mariota coming out, but I do think we're at the end of the Mariota experience.
Yeah, I definitely think that both those guys are going to be journeymen, I think, from this point on, if they stay in the league. And I think they will. But
I mean, they might flip teams. I mean, I've wondered about Mariota to Chicago because of their offensive coordinator and the ties he has with him. So who knows?
I mean, this is going to be the fun part to see where they end up, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit more of that. So, but first, let's talk about somebody who might be on the uptick here, and that's how high do you think Emmanuel Sanders can take Jimmy Garoppolo's game?
This is an interesting question, Matt, because I think some of what we might start to be seeing from Jimmy Garoppolo over the next couple of weeks in terms of the production and the output and him playing a little bit even better than he had been is due to more confidence in his body than anything else. I mean, remember, he's coming off the knee injury. And we see this oftentimes. We saw it last year with both Deshaun Watson and Carson Wentz. Early in the season, they didn't feel comfortable in their lower body. When you don't have that comfort level in your knee, you can't drive the football. It takes some time to sort of get back to that point. So I think that's part of it. But look, the acquisition of Sanders is going to be a big boost to this offense as well. And the creativity and the different ways that Kyle Shanahan's going to get him involved, use the pieces they have. Now you're down without the fullback, so you do some more 11 personnel stuff. That gives you an extra receiver to throw to. So obviously they're great talent. I think it's certainly going to help. I don't know if it's as big a boost as just the fact that Garoppolo is feeling comfortable in himself right now, and that's enabling him to play a little bit better.
Very nice. Yeah. And I think that, shut up. There we go. It won't shut up. There we go. Maybe it's because it knows it's time.
It's time.
Yeah, exactly. It wants to sing. So, listen, I'm with you. And I think the point about Jimmy Garoppolo's knee is a good one. And I think last week's game is a good example of where Garoppolo is as a player, because you could see that he was confident with Sanders, who basically played in the same offense as the 49ers in Denver, was, with Rich Scangarello, basically coming over there this past offseason. So he was very familiar with the scheme. And, the red zone throw that they made, that was also similar to one for the game winner to Dante Pettis against the Steelers. They looked very comfortable there. There was a dig route that was thrown over the middle where, Garoppolo threw it under pressure and put it only where Sanders could make the catch in a really nice low place. And that was a really nice timing route. But then there was basically a post corner route that was thrown where Sanders ran an awesome route, an absolutely fantastic route. And Garoppolo was about 2 beats late throwing that ball, if you ask me, based on just footsteps. And you could look at that and say, well, that's where he needs to be. And you could talk about where the reasons are. The reasons could be that his knee is just not quite comfortable yet when he sticks the landing on some of his drops. And he's trying to get he's just not confident and comfortable enough with where he stuck that landing to maybe he just doesn't have that level of anticipation yet with a receiver, and Sanders is presenting to him what that actually looks like and feels like. And if he can get acclimated to it, he could be great. If not, I think he's just a good starter.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it with Sanders. I'm very excited about the 49ers. I will say that. And if that happens to be a Patriots 49ers collision course, I think it's going to be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, I think it could be, but I'm a little worried about whether they have the receivers to win in man coverage. So I don't know if it would be as exciting as it looks. It might be exciting to watch Tom Brady against that defense. That might be fun. Yeah, but they need some guys to step up for Garoppolo to be able to fit that on more than just a narrative piece, if you ask me. But speaking of guys who are going to have to step up, Joe Flacco's out with the neck injury. What do we expect from Brandon Allen? And did we? And the second part of this, just to see if I can induce you into a timeout, is could we see who get a shot?
I have to save the timeout because when I was studying this list of questions last night, Matt, there are some later questions that I need to burn timeouts on. So I'm going to try to be quick and efficient here. I've come to the realization the more and more I do this, that quarterbacks are who they are. They don't change. And Trubisky is a great example of that. You know, the RPO play that he messed up against the Saints, he had a similar brain vapor lock situation in college. They just are who they are. And when I think of Brandon Allen, my mind flashes to a raw day down at Lad Peebles Stadium when they're running team drills at the Senior Bowl, and he's tucking and running on like a simulated 3rd and 7 situation. And if that's who you are on a Wednesday practice at the Senior Bowl, like that's who you're going to be in the National Football League, somebody that's afraid to pull the trigger, that will pull the ball down and not do what he's asked to do. And so I'm not expecting much from the Brandon Allen experiment, which means, yes, drum roll, everybody. I'm holding out hope that Brett Rippon gets a shot here in the next week or two.
Yeah, and I'm just going to skip the Brett Allen question in terms of in terms of even talking about him, because I think you mentioned that enough. Though I would like to add, what does that say about Daniel Jones? But but I don't want to. You work for one nice fellow and who over at Big Blue Review. But anyway, Brett Rippon. To me, I think, again, this is an example of the Denver Broncos having better quarterbacks on their depth chart than they're promoting and trying to work with at the top of their roster. Because I think that Rippon has probably the best feel of the quarterbacks in this group. I love the footwork. I love the ability, the experience with a variety of different drop plans and play action work. And he's someone that, while he doesn't have the most fantastic arm, and that may be why John Elway isn't in love with this guy, or a lot of NFL teams aren't. He has the feel to be a very good player, and I think in this Broncos offense, with the run game that they have, he can do enough to help open up that run game if you use him in a way that I think that they can adjust to. And I'm looking forward to that happening when the Broncos get shut out over the next couple of weeks.
There we go, folks. The Brett Rippon hype train. It's still chugging along. It's like sort of that beat up 1980 Chevy Malibu Classic. That was my first car. It just kind of chugs along, but you give it some new spark plugs, it'll get going again.
Well, see, there you are pulling up to that in the light, and you look over and you see the AMC gremlin, otherwise known as Chad Kelly, with me in it right next to you.
There it is. Days since a Chad Kelly reference on the quick game. Reset the counter to 0.
Exactly. There we go. We need to get one in there. So what about thoughts on Ryan Finley now that he's replacing Andy Dalton in Cincinnati? How do you feel about Finley?
I'm cautiously optimistic about this. And first of all, I think this was the smart move for Cincinnati, because we know that if we're talking about experiments being over, it might be time for that one in Cincinnati to be over with Andy Dalton. We know this is an intriguing quarterback class, to say the very least. We might see 3, 4, 5 first-round picks in this class. We know how quarterbacks rise up boards. There are going to be teams that want them. So Cincinnati needs to see what they have in Finley. And in Finley, they get an intriguing passer, very smart football mind, very smart person. He had like 3 master's degrees, I think, or at least 2 from NC State, and maybe even a third, because he graduated early from Boise State, might have gotten a master's there before his graduate transfer situation, his transfer to NC State. Very smart kid. When I talked to him at the Senior Bowl, incredible football mind. I had asked him about one of their route concepts, and he instantly was breaking it down for me on the field after practice, talking about getting the number 3 receiver isolated on a Mike linebacker and running them out on an out route towards the boundary, working away from him to take advantage of the leverage. When you watch him in preseason, I thought he played well. I'm optimistic about what we're going to see from him.
Yeah, I am too. And I think that he's a guy that he moves reasonably well in the pocket. I think he's an aggressive player downfield, which actually might play well to the types of receivers that he has, who are pretty good at going up to get it if you give him a chance to do that. I don't think he's a bad intermediate thrower at all in terms of what he can do in terms of with timing. So this could be a pretty decent situation for him in terms of just getting his feet wet. And it's going to be an adjustment in terms of playing at the speed that he's going to be playing with, the complexity of the defense he's going to be dealing with and all of that. But at the same time, there's a little bit more that we could be said about Andy Dalton. And And I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to make an executive call here, Mark, and
That
just kind of
works.
blend in the next question with this one. And then we'll let you answer the next one after this and just say that can Andy Dalton wind up a starter elsewhere? And he could end up with a starter elsewhere. But what I'm getting at here is that this was like 2, 3, 4 years too late with the Cincinnati Bengals. If you're really
Right.
talking about best practice, because I think the Bengals are what's typical in our society about the workplace, which is people who aren't competent enough to do what they need to do or aren't really the best match. Really, let's put it that way: the best match get put in too long or are allowed to do what they do for way too long until it's time to make a change. And I think that's what the Bengals kind of did here, is that their thought was, well, Andy Dalton didn't show up well in the playoffs. He doesn't show up well in big games. He tends to make big mistakes at times where he just fizzles out in a Trubisky-like manner at certain points. And you think, but then he plays well for long stretches, and you think, well, maybe we just build a great team around him and he can take us where we want to go. Well, if you've seen enough evidence that the guy just doesn't have the great mentality in terms of being able to make those pivotal plays, to me, that's when it's time to let him go. And yeah, the fans might have been mad when he went to Tampa and started off 5-0, and your team isn't doing well because you're working with a new quarterback. Maybe his name was Mahomes or something like that, and you had decided to make an early pick on a guy like that who might turn out to be pretty good, or a guy like Goff or somebody like that. And your team's upset because you gave away a playoff quarterback, but you might have wound up with a better guy overall who you didn't need to build as good of an offense and defense around overall for this to work. So I think with Finley, I mean, it's nice that they're giving him a chance, but it's a little on the late side.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that, because we knew, Andy Dalton had become sort of the go-to example of quarterback purgatory,
Yeah.
right? This idea that your quarterback is just good enough to be serviceable, but you're not getting anywhere close to over the hump with him. So why not just move on? And we've been waiting for teams to sort of follow that model. Somebody's going to go down that road. We thought maybe the Rams would do it with Jared Goff, but they're not going to. And so, yes, this was a decision made too late. Will Dalton become a starter somewhere else? Perhaps. You look around the quarterback landscape right now. Would he be an upgrade in Cincinnati? In Chicago? Yes. So I think there's one place where he could end up. And as we're recording this, apparently Dalton is addressing the media right now. He doesn't agree with the decision to be benched, and he wished it had been done earlier so he and his agent could have assessed quarterback needy teams and perhaps found a home in Chicago. And so I think you're exactly right. It's an example of organizations, whether the business world, the football world, or elsewhere, feeling complacent and not taking that risk to say, look, we know this isn't quite working out, and we're afraid of what we could find on the other side. But sometimes the grass is actually greener on the other side.
Yeah.
And if you're not getting to where you need to be, make the move earlier rather than later. How many years have the Bengals wasted of AJ Green and some of the other talent trying to figure out if Andy Dalton is good enough?
That's right. Imagine Matthew Stafford with AJ Green, Marvin Jones, and Mohamed Sanu, and a healthy Tyler Eifert. I mean, that's an upgrade to what he already has right now in Detroit, and look at how he's playing. So,
right.
And the offensive line was pretty darn good too. So, I mean, Matthew Stafford's probably looking at the Cincinnati Bengals and probably would curse that organization. Yeah. So how about Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense versus the Patriots defense? What do you expect out of that matchup this week?
Okay, here's the first time out. I had to burn one here because I think if you're a fan of the evolution of football, if you're a fan of schematic football, this game Sunday night is appointment viewing, because what you have in the Ravens offense right now and in Lamar Jackson is, I don't want to say he's revolutionizing the quarterback position right now, but he's certainly doing things at a high level, both as a passer and as a runner, that I don't think we can overstate. I mean, if you look at some of his passing metrics right now, and actually pull them up because I am working on a piece answering just this question. Look, he's a guy that is adjusted net yards per attempt. It's 13th in the league right now. 6.07. It's 13th in the league, ahead of some big name passers. His QBR of 70.9. That's 5th in the league behind only Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, and Deshaun Watson. In terms of expected points added per play, it's 0.2 per play, which is 12th among passers. These are pretty good to above average to very good numbers at the quarterback position, depending on what metric you're looking at. But that's just as a passer. Now consider what he brings to the table as a runner. Despite a bye last week, Jackson is still 15th in the league in rushing with 576 yards to his credit. That's obviously the most among passers, but again, 10th in the league, 10th in the league overall. He is averaging 82.3 yards per game on the ground, which is more than Saquon Barkley. That's also good for 10th in the league. Actually, I think that's 9th in the league. So he's doing both things incredibly well. And when you watch this Ravens offense, what they do so well is confuse the keys for linebackers because they will show you guys pulling, centers pulling, tackles pulling, guards pulling. And it looks like it's power, but there's a read element to it where either Jackson can keep the ball and follow pullers, or he can hand the ball off to guys that are following the pullers, or he can fake the handoff to the guys following pullers and keep the ball on the inside. And now the linebackers are reading the keys of the guys pulling. They vacate to the edge and they open a huge crease for him to keep the football. And so they put so much stress on the defense in terms of doing their job, reading their keys and all that stuff. Now they get the Patriots. And one of the dangers of defending a quarterback like Lamar Jackson is playing man coverage, right? Because if you play man coverage, you're looking at your receiver, your back is to the quarterback, and he can just take off and run. Well, what do the Patriots do more than anybody else? They play man coverage. So something has to give in that game. Something has to give Sunday night. And what I think we might see is something that I actually wrote about this spring, which is that 3-3-5, 3-2-6 tight front. If you look at, say, what Iowa State is doing in the Big 12, they're using that, nose guard, defensive ends on the defensive tackles, that three-man front, linebackers coming down to the edges. They're using that to slow down spread offenses. If you look at what the Patriots did last year, they used a lot of this. It was 15%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they were using it on situations like a 2nd and goal from the 4 against the Chiefs, where they ran it inside. They had a 3-2-6 with a tight front, and they stopped it from being a touchdown. They had a 3rd and 1 in that game. They ran 3-2-6 again, tight front, Patrick Chung down in the box. Kansas City ran a toss play to Tyreek Hill out of the backfield, and they stopped it for no gain using this package. What did you see the Chargers do against the Ravens in the wild card round last weekend? This tight front look, sub packages, but it makes it tough to defend these spread option looks, these zone read looks. So I think you're going to see a lot of that because the other thing these tight fronts do, the run fits work better with this and zone coverage than they do with man coverage. And so the Patriots are going to go to this tight front that they used a bit last year. They're going to play more zone. They're going to keep their eyes on Lamar Jackson and try to stop him that way. But this is a fascinating schematic game to watch. If you like that part of the game, watch this game Sunday night.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation, and I gave you one of my 3 minutes because I didn't want to stop you. I think that was a good way to go. Man, my pleasure, and that was just to let the idiots know out there who say, "Hey, you don't stick to the 3 minutes that you said that you're going to do on the thing." No, he gets one of mine, so we're making an executive decision here on this. That's right. This is how you do it. You make adjustments. You just don't stay, stay all like the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, that's right. See, there you go. So I like the fact that you talked about the Chargers, the defense that you're seeing that's similar with the Chargers in Iowa State, and how the Patriots will likely go that route, and it would make sense for them to do so. And since we can say that Bill Belichick is a rational coach, that is probably going to happen, then this also gives you an idea of seeing how Lamar Jackson has developed since that game. And I think part of that too is also how the Ravens will respond since that game, because as you notice towards the end of that Chargers game, Lamar Jackson started to drive that team up and down the field. And we understand that, so is this going to be something that he can make adjustments to? The other thing that I'm kind of curious about is whether or not the Ravens will run some of the play action looks that they do where they pull guards, because that's a very difficult thing to deal with when you're facing a team that blitzes. You know, you don't want to be
Right.
pulling, you don't want to be pulling linemen during blitzes. So this is going to be interesting from that standpoint. And he's a guy also that hasn't really been touched a lot. I know that I heard Ed Reed once talk on Rich Eisen saying, you know, he's got to, you know, cut down on the number of hits. And I'm thinking, Ed, I mean, like, I want to see you as a head coach. If I were a Cleveland Browns owner, I would hire you right now and take the chance with you as like someone to be either on the coaching staff or be a coach. But I'm looking at that and going, Lamar Jackson is probably the best quarterback in the league at avoiding hits, if you ask me, with the types of runs that he makes. So this is the week that I wonder if he's going to take some punishment and whether or not he's going to be able to hold up with that. But this is going to be a fun game. I agree with you on those fronts in terms of, you know, schematically how that's going to work out and whether or not they're going to make him throw to the outside, because if they crowd enough to the inside, we might just see him trying to work to the edge a lot, and we'll see a lot of runs, and he might have over 120 yards in this game as a rusher, but maybe less than 200 as a passer, and that could be the downfall for this team.
Yeah, I cannot wait for this game. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So which offense would you say give cover zero the greatest challenge in addition to, you know, what the Ravens do?
I think, are we talking today or historically?
Today.
See, that makes us, because I was going to go greatest show on turf. I thought that was going to be probably an easy way to answer this.
You can go either way then.
Yeah, I mean, we'll say historically greatest show on turf because, look, they had the weapons, and Kurt Warner, smart quarterback, knew how to get the ball out quickly. Maybe wasn't the most athletic guy, but I think, you know, he could manage to get that done. In terms of offenses today, that's a really difficult question. You know, part of me thinks the quarterback that can handle it the best is Tom Brady, because we can see him make pre-snap reads, pre-snap decisions, and knows where to go with the football, and does a good job, like you were just talking about with Lamar, of sort of avoiding some of the hits and some of the pressure in the pocket. But that receiving core is probably perhaps not the best at doing it. Man, thinking about a team today that can handle it the best is a tough one. I guess I'll just go by default and say New England. Just because of the competency at the quarterback position and the process and speed that he shows, that he's going to do enough from his point to get the ball out on time.
Okay. So, I mean, and that makes sense. And I think the tough part about this question for folks wondering why that is that you have teams like Atlanta where I would say one-on-one, if you just look at the quarterback and receivers, yes, this team could do very well against, you know, man coverage. It might be one of the best teams out there, but then you have to add the offensive line to the equation. And when you do that, it pretty much sinks their ship, you know? So then you have a guy like Drew Brees, and he has a really strong offensive line, but then you have basically receivers who are probably best built towards zone coverage. You know, with the exception of maybe Mike Thomas, you know, can't guard Mike. There's a reason why he has that up there, but still. And then I'd say the same thing, you know, with Minnesota's offensive line, but then you have Kirk Cousins and, you know, and these receivers who are, you know, just starting to get into the reunion honeymoon phase of their therapy. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, you know, when you put all of that together and you try and think of a team that might be all right. I mean, I that's a tough one. I'm going to say a healthy, I'm going to say Aaron Rodgers in terms of with the Packers, with the healthy Devontae Adams and even an old Jimmy Graham and a Marquise Valdes-Scantling. I think that there's enough with those players that he's the type of player that can handle the zero blitz pretty well. So I'm going to say Green Bay.
Yeah, that's a good answer. This is just a tough question. I mean, because there's so much that goes into defeating the zero blitz, from the line to the quarterback to the receivers and winning one-on-ones. That's why it's been so successful for New England this year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably the way to look at it.
And it's funny because it seems like we're going to like old school offense, old school defense. The best teams in the league in terms of certain categories are run oriented teams, you know, that run the ball really well and have good offensive line play. And the teams.
Well, we know that this game is cyclical, right?
Yeah.
You know, it always comes in phases. And what did we see over the past couple of years? Bill Belichick, more 21 personnel, using a fullback. You can say what you want about the guy, but he's usually ahead of the curve when it comes to things like this. So
yeah. So speaking of guy coming around the corner here in the college game, What are your thoughts on Jalen Hurts as a pro prospect?
He's going to be a tough eval. And I've said that before. I said that about, Kyler Murray last year. He's going to be a tough eval. I think he'll have some of the things working for him the teams are going to love. He's going to have sort of the competitive toughness, the leadership, the intangibles that go into play in the position that you just know it's just going to take one meeting of him sitting down. And I know we're going to talk about quarterback meetings in the eval process in a second, but it's just going to take one where a general manager, a coach, an offensive coordinator, an owner are going to just fall for this kid. You just know that's coming. So he's going to rise up boards. I think he's an intriguing quarterback. I don't think he's a complete quarterback prospect. I think there are holes to his game. There are things that he does where he transitions to runner too quickly for me. And I think that there are times when he can make throws from the pocket when he chooses not to because he can get away with it. And we've seen that hinder quarterback development most recently, perhaps with Marcus Mariota, like we were talking about earlier. And so I think there's going to be some rawness with him. There's going to have to be a developmental plan with him. I do think that he's going to get drafted early. I don't think it's a first round, but I think he's an early day 2 kid. And I could see him having some success in the right environment, but there'll need to be a plan in place for him.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that with Hurts, I mean, it's funny. I watch him and I think the short and intermediate accuracy is there for his game. And when he has a clean pocket and a lot of time, you can see that he starts to have a feel for where some of the backside or front side pressure is coming and where to slide to a side and find the open passing lane and anticipate where that pressure is. But he's not going to be getting, how would I put this? Prime time, all time best era Tom Brady pockets in the NFL. He's not likely to get that from most teams. So, I worry about his pocket presence, and because I don't see him as often taking the incremental steps that he needs to. And I do worry about him having more of a, is he more of a, how would I put it, more of a Marcus Mariota mover in the pocket? Or is he someone that gives you more of what Mitchell Trubisky does when he decides to break the pocket, which is a good thing, and I would say, so for Hurts, I agree. I think he's going to be a second or third round pick, or maybe an early 4th round pick in the draft. I think that's kind of the range where you could probably expect him. And, I'm just interested to see how good of a decision maker he is, because I think Lincoln Riley's offense is kind of like fantasy world for NFL quarterbacks. And I think that those who get into the NFL are starting, they end up in a reality that isn't the same as what they had in college. Those college days were just fantastic because they kind of, I hate to put it this way, but it's kind of a fill in the blank passing offense, if you ask me, compared to what quarterbacks do in the NFL, which is,
Go for it.
And I'm going to just take a quick little second to end it. It's kind of a fill in the blank offense in the sense of saying, we're going to give you something that looks like you're making a progression read, but it's really just setting up one throw. It's just setting up one route, and it just makes it look like you're doing complex stuff when you're actually just filling in a blank and showing off as if you're doing something different. But and it's a lot of window dressing with that. So I wonder if that's really going to help his game, and I wonder if NFL people are really understanding that that's what's going on with this offense.
No, that's such a great answer, and he is, like I said, going to be a tough eval, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right. So here we go. Russ Landy and I, on a recent podcast of Scout Talk, discussed coaches' interviews of quarterbacks before the draft and how they could create a false impression. I mean, he relayed this story about how he was able to talk with the Eagles and Rams coaches before the draft and the scouting staff when they knew, what the draft spots were going to be. And they all, to a man, said that Jared Goff was the most pro-ready guy to make an immediate impact, and that Wentz was going to need a little bit more time, like at least a year. And then after the interviews with the players, after the draft, that was during the interviews. After the draft, after like they were in camp for about a month, he asked them the same question, and to a man, they all had flip flopped and said Wentz over Goff, and that Goff was going to need at least a year to get it all together. And that from a team perspective, they weren't alarmed by that. From a media perspective, everyone seemed alarmed by that. But the teams seem to have a better expectation, knowing that they don't really know what they're going to get with a quarterback until they get him onto the team. And I asked that question because I kind of asked him the question about, well, seemed like in hindsight that Wentz, playing in a West Coast scheme, it would have made more sense for teams to think that was that he'd be a better fit. Whereas with Goff, everyone in the media was kind of wondering about his work in the air raid offense. So he talked about how just that coaches, how coaches and scouts bring in players for interviews and what they interview them by, playing back their biggest mistakes on tape and asking them to like review things on the whiteboard. And there's a lot of theory that's really discussed in those things. And that can turn coaches and scouts towards a player, even if you're looking at the schematic fit and wondering about that. And it just seems to me when I watched this, he used Brady Quinn as an example and how he wowed coaches and scouts for his ability to do what you've called, I think, the Sean McVay parlor trick, where he, retains plays and remembers, what happened on 3rd and 3 with 3:30 left in the third quarter in 1987 in the Washington Rams game, playoff game or whatever, and to me, it just seems like evaluators in the NFL level may be rewarding quarterbacks more for their ability to recall how they messed up rather than their processing speed or intuition for the game or problem solving skills that actually show up on the stage and not in the classroom. And I just wondered what you think about that.
Yeah, and I think it's a brilliant sort of thing to think about because, and I guess I'll take a timeout here because I'll probably run over. When you think about the whole quarterback evaluation process and the whole draft process itself, every team is sort of trying to find that little edge. And maybe they think that when it comes to the quarterback position, the knowledge that the quarterback has that comes across in that meeting room, like I was just talking about how Jalen Hurts might come across in a meeting room, is critical to what that player is going to become in the National Football League and their ability to handle that sort of moment and become the face of the franchise. And that is the stuff that maybe matters. And so that meeting in the hotel suite or the conference room or whatever becomes important. And because it is important, because the draft is a year-long event and the draft is depraved, as we all know, we've had sort of a cottage industry of sorts that is preparing them for this moment. And we've started teaching quarterbacks to the test, right? So you can go into that suite, you can do the parlor trick of, oh yeah, when I was playing, Peabody High School, we had a 2nd and 17 and, we ran dual fade routes to the left and I tried to feather it in rather than throwing it up there because, even though my receiver was 6'4" versus a 5'11" corner, I was still stuck in this mindset that I needed to make a perfect throw rather than the best throw for that moment, which yes, is something that happened to me. So I can do the parlor trick too. It doesn't mean I can go out Sunday night and beat Bill Belichick, but it means that when I walk into that room, I can leave everybody to think, oh, wow, man, he's got great recall. He must know how to play the position well. By teaching these guys to the test, we're propping them up in a completely artificial environment that speaks nothing to the fact of what they can do as an actual quarterback, both playing the game on the field and learning how to play the game away from the field. And the Goff Wentz thing is fascinating because I remember in the build-up to his draft, Ted Wynn over at ITP at the time talked to his offensive coordinator, Wentz's offensive coordinator at NDSU. At the end of every season, he would give the quarterback sort of a sheet of paper and basically said, I want you to rewatch your season and give me plays that you could have done better on. Give me some audibles you could have made, some decisions you could have made, et cetera, things you could have done to play better. And he handed it to them after they had won the national championship once his junior year. And the coach expected to get it back in a couple of weeks. Matt, he got it back the next day from Wentz, highlighting everything he had done wrong and could have done better. So you can't tell me that Wentz doesn't know how to go in and run an offense and make some calls and make some checks. And the fact that maybe Goff sort of impressed in the artificial environment, but once people saw what these guys were doing in an NFL offense, people felt Wentz was probably better suited to take over, I think speaks volumes about this entire question. So we might be doing the evaluation process for quarterbacks in the draft wrong. We know that because how teams get it wrong so often. And we're talking about guys like Mariota and Trubisky not panning out. So yeah, I think we need to fix it somehow.
Yeah, I'm going to take a timeout as well and talk about this one because I think they really do. And this just goes down to human nature about interviewing people in any type of job situation. And oftentimes we can be wowed by the wrong things, and people fancy themselves because they have that role that they're supposed to know how to do this type of work. But who really gets trained on how to interview? I mean, I don't, the way they got, usually how you get trained on how to interview is you sit in and watch other people do that job. And you don't know whether they're good at it or not. They're just in that job, and you might think they're good at it, and you might read some books about it, but that's about it. You're not really getting trained to be an interviewer. And there's a lot to that in terms of, how you observe people, what type of answers do they give, how you're setting up questions from point to point. What are tells that people are kind of full of crap about what they're saying. And also us understanding what's really important, what kind of things we're really trying to get out of our questions so that we plan the interview better. And I think that that's part of the problem is that we don't really, I don't think the league necessarily understands how to interview quarterbacks for what it is that they want from the quarterback. They might have a few questions that I'm sure if, I went into an interview, sat in on an interview and go, wow, that's a great question. I think that would be really good. I still think that overall, if someone came in who was an expert at how to do interviews and how to get information that you're trying to get, that they would probably go through this process and go and probably come away with that answer is that they don't understand that what they want is an intuitive performer who understands how to make adjustments with what he sees and is confident about with his reaction time to what he's doing, and that he can make and that you can project that he would be able to do that as he learns that offense and balance out more the skills that you need, because I think they overemphasize memory. They overemphasize what I call, how would I put it? Suburban white boy academic, Northern Chicago kind of, John Hughes movie important types of things, like, the SAT and the ACT and all the things that we saw in movies growing up in like the 80s and 90s and 2000s that Hollywood thinks childhood is important for, and that shows intelligence, and it's like book smarts, whereas if you look at it and say, well, if there's a disparity between rich and poor, and what often happens is that poor people don't do as well on some of these tests, well, it's because they don't have the same kind of book smart preparation. But we overemphasize that because honestly, in real life, there's a difference between book smarts and actual life smarts. And I think that quarterbacks need more life smarts than they need book smarts, and you need to balance that out a little bit. They need some, it's important, but we've emphasized it well beyond the point of what's actually worthwhile. And that's the problem with this, with this whole interview process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And, you and I have talked a ton about the evaluation process and our disappointments with it at times, and this is just another example.
Yeah, and we'll move on to it kind of in another way of that, and just kind of to emphasize this point a little bit more, because thinking about your great article that you put on the RSP about ruining quarterbacks and giving the example of the past military generals and how that relates to how quarterbacks are being managed in their development, kind of got me thinking about Bruce Lee, the great martial arts master, and how, his development of Jeet Kune Do was a response to unnecessary forms that got in the way of function with traditional martial arts. And I've been thinking about relating this to a quarterbacking article in a forthcoming essay at the RSP, because it just seems that quarterback analysis and coaching methodologies, they just trickle down to evaluation methods of the position in an unhealthy way. I mean, To me, just because you can recognize the differences between cover three and quarters, or can diagram concepts the way my middle school English teacher could diagram sentences, doesn't mean that they're respectively franchise quarterbacks, or award-winning published novelists, for that matter. When you talk about the grammarian in the classroom. And the more that I do this, the more I'm believing that reading leverage and spotting isolated coverage patterns quickly and identifying where you need to go is more important than recalling the entire diagram and having mastery over the whole thing. I mean, I understand having some level of understanding of the whole is important, but at a certain level, I think it just comes down to that we've gotten in the way with all this thinking about technique, all this thinking about pre-snap and post-snap and different coverage types and identifying all the different things that quarterbacks have to do, all this layers of stuff, but we haven't really slimmed it down as much. I mean, the one guy that has, the guy who probably is the Jeet Kune Do advocate in the football world right now might be Dub Maddox with his R4 system. I mean, that might be part of the Jeet Kune Do or the rise of that for quarterbacking. But I'm just wondering what you think about this in terms of it, because you're terrific at the schematic aspects of it, but you also see things in a perspective where it's not just about, the Baker mentality of, well, he did the right, Kirk Cousins did the right thing because of this type of coverage that I'm seeing here. And this is what it says on the page. And you tend to have a little bit more of a you can look at things on both methods of not just being by the book, but also reading between the lines.
Yeah, and it's probably no surprise that I'll go ahead and burn the final timeout here, which I think is a quick game first, somebody burning all three. And we're doing it early in this show, and so I hope I don't have a lot of Halloween stories here. But I know the genesis of this question in a sense because it came from a fantastic tweet from Bets at All22, who talked about this as well, and you and him had a good back and forth about it on Twitter. And I think the first thing to sort of remember and realize is that the days of a pure, oh, this is cover three, oh, this is cover two, oh, this is cover six, are over. There is so much man match, zone match, pattern match stuff being played out that what looks like cover three might not be, what looks like cover two might or might not be. And if you want proof of this, get on Twitter on a Tuesday or a Wednesday when inevitably somebody like Betts or somebody else will put up a coverage play and say, what coverage is this? And you will get 10 different smart football minds that know the game give you 10 different answers. Because even with the benefits of slow motion and pause and rewind and screenshots and all of that, it is still hard to tell. So if it's hard for us to tell from the comfort of our couches while drinking fruit punch, it's going to be that much tougher for a quarterback in the pocket to tell what coverage it is when he's got 4 or 5 defensive linemen trying to cause him physical harm. And so at that point, it doesn't really matter what the coverage is. What matters if you can find somebody open to throw the football to. And so the variations of coverage schemes are throwing that out the window, which is why we're seeing simplification in concepts. Many teams now, reads are basically middle of the field open, middle of the field closed. So it doesn't really matter what they're in as long as you can decipher between one safety in the middle of the field and 2 safeties. Because if it's 2 safeties, they're likely doing this, and that's where you can go with the football as a result. If it's 1 safety, they're doing something a little bit different, and now you've got routes to throw to based on the middle of the field being closed. Or you can do what teams like the Eagles are doing. If you look through their playbook, you will have route concepts where they're half field reads, and it's not if it's cover 2, you throw left, if it's cover 3, you throw right. It's man versus zone. So as long as you can figure out if it's a man coverage concept, you throw to one side of the field, or if it's a zone coverage concept, you throw to the other side of the field, you'll find somebody open to throw the football to. And so this process that I myself, like you said, have been guilty of, oh, this is a cover 6 read and he should be throwing this. It's going by the wayside because the defenses are so complex. They're adjusting for the times that now you just have to find somebody that's open based on the look that you're getting. And you might not get it right. If you sit down with your coach at the end of the game, Monday or Tuesday, or whatever, and he says, you read the coverage wrong here, you read the coverage wrong here, you read the coverage wrong here, but you made good plays, that might be where we're headed. And so this, what we've often fallen into of the process over the results. Well, maybe it's now a more result-based business because we can't tell what the right process should be based on what defense is doing. So now you've got to be able to just decipher where you can go with the ball and make the right decision based on that moment.
Interesting, and I love the examples that you provided with that. I mean, they're compelling. Let me get this canceled here before the timer goes off. You had about a good 5 seconds left to go.
I practiced this one.
You did a good one, man. That was good. So, I mean, listen, I think that what happens here is that it's just that we have the wrong process for all of this. I think we're over intellectualizing the process to an extent. And that's what happens when you get, more and more technologically advanced with everything that we do. And as we get into a medium where there's more and more information, the more likely you're going to over intellectualize it. You're going to go too far with it. And I think there's a happy medium between understanding the basics of coverage and then like you said, finding on the field, the tells between, like the triangles, the coverage triangle between the corner, safety, and linebacker, being able to look at things like that and helping you determine what's man and what's zone, or what might be man or zone in this particular type of situation. And I'm taking 3 minutes, by the way. I'm sorry I didn't say this before, but yeah, but this is one of those situations that I think it's like, I think of literature as an example. You want to be a writer. And there are a lot of guys probably listening here are more likely to want to be a writer than they want to be a quarterback. And I think that, you could go to a literature class and you could read, William Faulkner's book Sanctuary, and you could do an essay on a scene where there's this alternate imagery of black and white imagery, which is called the chiaroscuro effect. Okay. Talk about over intellectualizing something. You could talk about how this one scene, there's this alternating imagery of black and white that continues to increase as the emotional content of the emotional intensity of the scene reaches its, apex. And you could talk about how brilliant that was and how much of an emotional effect it did stir in the reader, and how much of a genius William Faulkner was. But then you could probably ask William Faulkner if he ever heard the term chiaroscuro effect, and he'd say, "No, I've never heard of that in my life. What is that?" What's what you did in that chapter. And I think that it's kind of the same way that in football, we often talk about, well, he needs to know what to do in a cover 6 situation when, when this and this and this and this and this happens. When really, when it comes down to it, it's more about understanding, the basics. William, Faulkner probably understood, he understood how to write good sentences. He understood how to create a story. He understood how to create drama, but it wasn't with all this. All the intellectualization part came later by the academics trying to explain something in a way and give it a label to what the actual artist was doing. And I think, again, because I believe that quarterbacking is more of an art than it is a science, I think that that's part of the problem, is that we're trying to evaluate and trying to review people from a scientific perspective and give scientific labels or academic type of labels to something that's more of an art. And as a result of that, there's a gap between the artist and the reviewer. It's kind of the same thing that you see with people who review books, and they attribute all these things. And then you ask the writer, and the writer goes, I think I was drunk when I wrote that. And, and I was sad about this. And I saw this movie, and I always liked these detective novels. And I just kind of took influences from that, not knowing exactly what that was until I wrote it, until it just felt right to do. And I think that, there is a real process and craft to writing, but I'm just saying that he might have given you that off the cuff answer, and he might have done it in a very methodical, craft oriented sort of way. But again, it's not as scientific and academic as we put out there when we're writing about it all.
Right. No, I think, very well done.
Okay. Well, a guy who did pretty well himself was Matt Moore this Sunday, and I'm just wondering, he was a scout with the Dolphins this past year until they called him up, in Kansas City. Did he earn another contract that's going to delay him from another scout year as a scouting gig, with Sunday night's performance? Do you think
I th-
he gets a shot to play somewhere else
I
or play
think
here another
so.
year?
I think so because and we're going to talk about quarterback room construction in a moment, but I think there is an advantage for a franchise to have a veteran quarterback that can come in if needed without a lot of reps, without a lot of practice time, and just keep the offense sort of on schedule and be effective and make some quick and smart decisions with the football and take care of the football and not actively impair his team. And I think that's what you saw from Matt Moore Sunday night. Now, look, they didn't win, but you're playing without Patrick Mahomes, but he goes out, completes 67% of his passes or so, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, not a ton of mistakes, played a very clean game. Yes, Andy Reid deserves a lot of credit for that as well. But teams are going to see that, and teams that might go down we need a new quarterback, we're going to make a quarterback change, and there's a lot of uncertainty here. There's value in having a guy like Moore that can come in and not hog up the limited practice time you have with the guy you're trying to get ready, but still give you competent quarterback play if he has to go on the field. And so I think what teams saw from Matt Moore is going to be attractive to them. So yeah, I think he gets another deal.
Yeah, I think he does too. And I think that if it isn't in Kansas City, I think he finds it somewhere else, just because of the fact that he has shown over the past 3 teams that he's been with that he can play in the pocket, that he can work outside of it when needed to, and that he's willing to attack downfield and do it in an intelligent manner. So, he may not be a dynamic quarterback, but I think he's good enough in terms of what he does that he can help your team that has big play weapons still sustain that big play ability and keep that offense fairly versatile. So yeah, I like what he did, and I think that's going to help out. All right, so how about thoughts on the Philadelphia soap opera with the leaky receiver? Alshon Jeffrey apparently, I guess, leaking his thoughts on Carson Wentz. Is this isolated to Jeffrey, or is it more of a systemic thing? Should we be worried about Carson Wentz and the drama in Philadelphia?
It's hard not to be worried about this, and it does seem like it's a bit of a mess right now in Philadelphia. And I'm not Josiah Anderson. I don't have sources or anything like that. But as somebody that sort of covers the Eagles for Bleeding Green Nation with an Eagles podcast, and talking to some media personalities in and around Philadelphia, it does sound like there's a level of discontent in this locker room right now that is in part, but not solely, but in part with Carson Wentz. And in part of it is the leadership style of Carson Wentz, apparently, because he's more of a lead by example guy, which maybe you need more than that, like we were talking about with Tannehill and Mariota. And so it does seem like there's something going on here. And when you add to that some problems with protection, some receivers that haven't held up their end of the bargain, you see that creep into Wentz's play. He's been hesitant at times. He's double clutched on throws that he was making on time and in rhythm over the past couple of years. And so while, yes, they had a nice win against Buffalo, which is a good defensive road win, maybe it righted the ship for a week, it does seem like there are some underlying problems here with this locker room that only winning will fix it. If not, who knows what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think that there is something to do with the Carson Wentz thing. And I'm going to go a little bit more towards that leadership part because, I mentioned it early on about how leadership by example is just one facet of leadership. You can be a quiet leader and be effective, but you, at some point during whatever project, campaign, or, season that you're leading, you need to be able to be vocal at some point, and it needs to be at the right time. You need to know how to say the right things. You need to know how to motivate people, and you need to know when not to be just a nice guy and to be a people pleaser. And I think Carson Wentz, and this is, again, I'm just totally speculating here based on what little I know. So I understand that. So if you tell me I'm wrong about it, I'm going to agree with you. I may well be, but I think he's a bit of a people pleaser. I think the whole let's invite people going hunting type of thing sounds great to media people. Eat that up who don't know the first thing about leadership either, because they're writing in newspapers and online, and they're not really leading teams doing anything, and probably most of them didn't have any of that experience except maybe, in ninth grade when they did that class project that they'll probably tell you about personally while they're having drinks with another media member. So, to me, It's about the fact that you have to sometimes stand up to people, and sometimes you have to tell them what they don't want to hear and do it in a respectful way, but do it in a way that shows your authority. And I don't know if Carson Wentz really has shown that. He's just shown that he's a really tough SOB in the pocket who inspires people to want to play for him. But when the things get hard, can he jerk them around and say, Alshon, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
And like, we're trying to win here. You don't want to win? Go somewhere else. You can go play in another Chicago if you want to and get your 1,000 yards. That's great. But we're trying to win a Super Bowl. You've got to have some of those conversations. I don't think they're doing that there. So
No, I think that's exactly right.
yeah. So what about Dak Prescott? Do you go for the big dough or do you take the team friendly deal?
I'd like to sit here and say that, no, if it were me, you do the right thing by the team, you have a team friendly deal, you try to build around you. But look, this is a short game for many people. And even though you see quarterbacks last and have longer careers, you never know when it could end. So I think you need to take care of yourself in some sense. And let's be honest about Dak Prescott this year. He's playing at a very high level. And a lot of the people like Ben Baldwin and others that sort of dive into, the more advanced metrics, EPA and completion percentage over expected, they're pointing out the fact that he is playing at an extremely high level. And so I think you should make a push for a bigger deal than maybe people think that you're worth, because the play on the field this year, the film that he's put together, things that I've often dinged him for, like the inaccuracy or the poor ball placement or the things like that, he seems to be better in that realm. And so you put that together. I think you push for a big play, big money deal, because if you are that good, if you have become such a better quarterback than we've seen over the past couple of years, you will be able to raise the level of playing those guys around you.
Yeah.
The one caveat to that is we have seen him struggle when he's not protected. And so that brings me back to the idea that maybe the best thing for you isn't a big payday up front, but the fact that you can extend your career with guys around you. So maybe I'm talking myself out of the big money deal and saying, I'll take a little bit less, but please spend it on some tackles for me.
Right. And I think that, I look at Prescott and I think that he should stay in Dallas. It should be the best thing for his career and for the Cowboys. But I understand that he's going to want to get paid as much as he can possibly get paid within reason to help the team, but also to help himself. And if the Cowboys are offering him a deal that turns out to be insulting, I don't profess to try and get into the economics of this or the physical part of all of this. But what I will say is if there's a team that I would like to see Dak Prescott go to, if it isn't staying on the Cowboys, is just on the surface. I'm curious about how he would match up with Bruce Arians in Tampa Bay, because I think he makes wiser decisions than Jameis Winston. He may not be quite as whiteboard sound as Jameis Winston has been early in his career compared to what Prescott may have been early in his career. But I know that Prescott knows where to throw the ball and where not to throw the ball, and also knows how to work in a pocket that isn't always working out well for him. And he has a pair of really strong receivers and a tight end that he knows how to go to.
Yeah, I like that.
So yeah,
Prescott and Arians. I never thought about that, but that's brilliant.
It could be a fun one. So what do you think? What team should take a chance on resurrecting Marcus Mariota via the Tannehill route we saw with
No, I
Tennessee
think
Titans?
Chicago makes a lot of sense. And partly it's because of the Trubisky thing gone awry. But look, when you look, their offensive coordinator is who Mariota played with at Oregon. And if you're going to try to tap into what Marcus Mariota was at his best, it was getting back to where he was when he was in college. Because I thought even then you saw instances of him handling the pocket better, of him making anticipation throws. And maybe he needs to get back to that. And so I think Chicago is the best landing spot for him. I don't know if it happens, but that's, if I were advising Marcus Mariota, that's where I would tell him to go. Because let's face it, you could beat out Mitchell Trubisky right now anyway, so you're probably going to get a shot at the starting gig. And you're reunited with a guy that made you a Heisman Trophy candidate and the second overall pick. So I think that's the best place.
I don't think I have a better answer than that. So we're going to move on to the next one and say, yeah, I love it. That was great. So what's the same question for Jameis Winston? Where do you think he should wind up?
This is a tough one. I really thought the Arians thing was going to work. It's clear that it has not. I'm going to say the Chargers. And I think you move him behind Phillip Rivers for a year. I think that might be a good quarterback for him to learn from. I think that offense, which had some vertical elements to it, would be a pretty good fit for him. And so I think this would be the best chance at him sort of reinventing himself, as he's never going to be the guy that's not going to take risks. He's never going to be the guy that's not going to throw picks. But if he learns from somebody that's has that similar play style, if he's in an offense that will allow him to take some chances with the football, but then also take some pressure off of him at times with what they do with the running backs, both in the run game and in the passing game, that might be a good chance to sort of turn the ship around.
Okay, I think that's a good answer. I'm going to give a different one, and it's going to be the most oddball combination probably on the surface.
Oh, boy.
But I think the Houston Texans. I think that it, you look at the Houston Texans and what they have in terms of receivers, what they have in tight ends, in terms of how they run this offense. Certainly, he's not going to be able to run like Deshaun Watson does, and some of that option play might be kind of a waste of time for teams to actually believe with him behind that. But I think with the types of receivers that they have and how he could work downfield and the way that they could function with this offense, and the line is getting better, I'd kind of like to see him in a scenario where you just kind of back up Watson for a while, get a chance to work a little bit more in a scenario where maybe you can kind of take a little bit more time with your game, because most of what he's going to have to do is going to be self-directed. So my real answer is I don't care where he goes, because I really don't believe he's going to have a strong career as a starter anywhere. But I think that working in Houston, he's someone that if he had to get into a game, he could actually throw to the outside in a way that Watson doesn't necessarily do as well. And he'd have the receivers to kind of work with that. And I just think that it would be a team where he could attack downfield, but he also has, he would have the time, I guess, in my opinion, to really kind of rework his game if he's willing to do that.
Not high on Winston, are you?
No, I just don't think. I mean, in every way that you should be high on a quarterback from a checklist standpoint, he's so enticing. But just from the standpoint of when it comes down to the simple thing of the intuitive, how you play the game, manage the game, it's like Trubisky. Both of those guys, I just think that, we're in denial about, we justify things that shouldn't happen. And I just want to add this little thing about Trubisky, if you don't mind.
No, go for it.
It's just this one thing. I think the problem with Mitchell Trubisky and the way people evaluated Mitchell Trubisky is that they said he's been in the, he's only played quarterback was only a starter at UNC for 2 years. And so the glass is half empty, and as a result, or half full. And that means he hasn't had time to learn the bad things. But here's the thing. It's a lot like any type of performance medium, is that if you've played this long, that you've gotten to the college level and you can't make intuitively good decisions inside your own 20 or inside the red zone, and you're really making disintegrated, horrible decisions that are just like leave you slack jawed as a viewer, because they're just fundamentally not good. How do you think it's going to get better in the NFL when now things are more complex, everything's faster, and there's more pressure on you? I mean, are you really going to get better at that if you weren't good at it before, just because you didn't have as much as experience doing it the wrong way as often for 4 years? No, you've been doing it wrong before. If you're intuitively getting it wrong at a lower level, you're going to intuitively get it wrong at a higher level if it isn't an easy fix. And those things aren't easy fixes. And you're, like you said, quarterbacks stay the same on certain intuitive levels. I think they do. And I think that's the problem with Trubisky. I think that's the problem with Winston, is that we really gave them a pass on things that we shouldn't have. And so what happens is we're all looking at arm, we're all looking at whiteboard knowledge, we're all looking at those things, and we keep giving these guys chances because we're unwilling to be as dismissive and discriminating at the certain things that really are just no-goes. And at the same time, we get all bent out of shape over Patrick Mahomes's, behavior, and then he does brilliant work. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with quarterbacking, I guess. So,
quarterbacking.
We are getting, quarterbacking. So we're getting kind of low on time. So we're gonna do a few more here, and we'll see what we can get out of it here. And one of those questions is, if you could get a Wonder Woman lasso of truth thrown around Bill Belichick, and you could ask him a question where he'd have to give you an honest answer, what would you most likely ask him?
Man, I should have saved the timeout for this one because I have so many questions for Bill Belichick. Did I make the right decision and majored in the College of Social Studies at Wesleyan, or should I have done what you did and been an economics major? Was Wesleyan the right decision for you? Did you really enjoy your time there? When you look at the quarterback position, what is it that you really evaluate the most? Bill, is Halloween really the best holiday? Because you say it is. You say it's a great holiday. You dressed as a pirate one year, and that was a fantastic costume. Is a tight end the most difficult thing to defend as a defensive coordinator? Because I've said that on so many shows and in so many articles. Please don't make me like a fool. Please tell me that that is the truth. But of course, the question I would have to ask is a hot dog a sandwich? No, the question would be, what happened with the Garoppolo trade? I think I would have to ask him that question.
Okay. That's a great question. And I think mine are kind of more sillier. I mean, but I think the one that comes to mind the most to me is, why did you want to trade Randy Moss?
Yeah.
Like what exactly happened there? And would you do it? And maybe it would be a 2-part question if I could get it, which would be, and would you take that back?
Right. Yeah.
So how would you build a quarterback depth chart? How many quarterbacks would you want in the room? What type of player styles are you looking at? What kind of age ranges? What type of personalities and strengths are you looking for with that?
Yeah, this is a question I gave a lot of thought to. First of all, I'm a huge believer in having 3. I think it matters for so many reasons, from team construction, from full-on practice, and you need somebody that can focus on scout team stuff while also having somebody, your true backup, like also there with the offense and doing things. I hate it when you have, just 2 quarterbacks at a time. That makes it really tough from a practice standpoint. I think you want to have varied skill sets between your backup and your 3. I think you want to have one of them that will mirror what the starter does. So if you have a Lamar Jackson, you like to have an RG3. I understand why the Ravens have that sort of backup. But I think you also kind of want to have a third quarterback that's going to be a little bit different, that might make it a little bit difficult for the defense. And you might even have a package of plays for that player to keep the defense sort of off guard. I think you do want to have one Matt Moore type who might be that third guy that can be an extra set of eyes and ears, can be that sort of pseudo coach on the sidelines that can help the sort of starter. And so I think you want like 2 younger guys and one more veteran guy, a veteran guy that's comfortable with where he is in his career, knowing that he's not the guy anymore, but he can do some small things. He can be an extra voice. He can do some scout team stuff. Or if it's a week where you get a more athletic quarterback, then your backup does some more scout team stuff and gives the defense a good look. So that's how I would handle it. But it's tough thinking about putting together a QB room these days with all the roster constraints teams have.
Yeah, that's true. And we're talking perfect world scenarios for sure. But I love the idea of what you talked about with having that third quarterback, or that I want to have 3. And I certainly would want to have, I kind of thought of him as a permanent number 2 quarterback, and like, to me, my permanent number 2 quarterback would be Alex Smith. Like he would be a guy. Now, getting him at the expense that at the right price would be the most difficult thing, is you would need to be able to get someone who may not have had Alex Smith's experiences as a starter, but I'd want to try and ideally find someone who had some starter experience, who's kind of more like your Crash Davis type of guy, from using a baseball reference there. But being kind of that veteran who can say, I know what it's like to be at this level, to play at this level, but I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you get better. And to be able to convince some veteran quarterback that that's really what his gig is. And it's like, listen, you can be my Don Strock. You could be here for 40 years if I could allow it. And you could be the first 60-year-old quarterback to basically retire, and we just keep you on the roster and put the third guy in ahead of you. But you're officially our number 2 quarterback for that reason. And I think that, to help develop the other guys. So that would be the key thing for me. How about structuring a scouting department? How would you structure a scouting department?
I think you have to first delineate between pro and college scouting, because the advanced scouting number 1 and free agency scouting number 2, they're so critical. And I think you sort of forget this idea of doing it by region. I'm a big believer in letting people do what they know best. And, this one size fits all person that can scout everything, maybe that works in a numbers crunch, but I like the idea of having like a QB scout, a skill position scout, like a wide receiver scout, like a tight end scout, an offensive line scout, and running back scout on the offensive side of the ball. Like, I don't want a guy whose background is, in the offensive line or, defensive line or linebacker, also being like my regional scout. And now we've got to study quarterbacks in that area of the country. And he's the first set of eyes and ears on a guy. Like, I like sort of specialized scouting. So I would do it more by position than by region. I know that's, and, the complete opposite of how teams do it for the most part, but that's how I'd approach it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I love that idea of specializing. I'd probably do something like that. I'd probably steal that from you, but also probably give each guy a second and third responsibility in terms of learning. They wouldn't necessarily be guys that would be responsible for scouting. If you scout quarterbacks, I would have you scout wide receivers and maybe cornerbacks or something like that. But I wouldn't have you necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily have you be responsible for writing up reports on them. But what I would be doing is regularly be having guys who that's actually my end of podcast alarm letting me know that they'd like to talk to me right now. But I will do that in a minute or two. But I would say that I think that what I'd like to see is more calibration, less work out in the field. You can put the top guys, have your top management guys work, in the field, and have them actually ask the questions and go and interview people and get them experience. Have the people who should be making decisions do the interviews, and then have the people who are doing the actual scouting stay in and watch more tape. You don't need to go to the game. Going to practice, I understand to an extent. But again, if you're getting the top guys to be able to piece everything together that way, let them travel once you've seen enough tape on these guys, and have the people doing the legwork on the ground, spend more time watching film, staying at home, doing it remotely. And then you can also calibrate them all together to make sure they're looking at the things that you need them to be looking at. And you can cross-train them on different positions eventually, so that once you get to the decision-making prospect where each person who handles a position is, has their reports, you can then review selected tape with guys who are your secondary and your tertiary responsibilities at those positions, and have a room of people together who you trust to help you kind of pick things apart that you want to do when you're getting to making your board. And I'd like to see a little bit more from that end, where there's a continuous learning angle, and it's not just, throw you out there and good luck on how you're going to learn to do this. Cause we teach I think a lot of scouts are taught in the same way that quarterbacks are taught in the NFL, which means that there's not a lot, so. All right, so let's do one last one here, and I guess the question that I would most likely to do here is, let's just do a fun one just for the fun of it, and let's say you get to pick the Halloween one of the last four here. Which Halloween one do you want to ask about?
Either 19 or 22. I'm fine with either one.
Okay, let's see. Let's do the craziest Halloween tradition you've ever seen in your neighborhood.
Okay. This one's a bit different because we just moved. Okay. And so we're in a new neighborhood right now. Everybody is doing a fantastic job sort of decorating their houses. There's actually a house just around the corner that has a skeleton sort of coming out of the ground, and it's holding a beer can, a bottle of Yingling in its hand, which I thought is fantastic. So the decorations around here have been fantastic. But in our old neighborhood, 2 houses ago, so not even where we moved from, but even before that, we lived in Logan Circle in DC, right down the street from DuPont Circle. And they have their Halloween high heel drag race that is down 17th Street in DC. It's a couple of blocks, and you have all these contestants, these runners in drag, in high heels, sprinted down the street. They have all the bars that are all like overflowing people into the streets to watch it. It's one of the most fun, enjoyable parts of living down in that area. The traffic is brutal. Like, heaven help you if you're trying to get home in that area around that time. But if you get a chance to go watch it, it's an incredible time. Tons of fun. They just had it a couple of nights ago. It's always a can't miss event. So it'd be the high heel drag race.
That's awesome. And I would say The fun part about my new neighborhood now is that it's mostly Indian in terms of like the makeup of the demographic. So we had a lot of Diwali celebrations on
Oh,
Sunday, which
wow.
was pretty awesome. Very awesome to see, and it's just I love the neighborhood I live in. But in terms of craziest funny Halloween tradition I've seen, I'm gonna have to go back to when I was a kid, and I grew up in Mayfield Heights, Ohio, which is kind of more of an old Italian neighborhood at that time. I think it's more Russian now, but when I would go Halloween trick or treating, I remember there was this one house down the street from the apartments that I grew up in, and there was this little house where basically there was a line like out the driveway and at least like 4 houses down to get into this house. And I'm like, what are they doing? Like having a haunted house or something? And people are like, no, you could win money here. And I'm like, I'm like 8 years old, and I'm trick or treating with my friends. So we wait in line, and literally the line weaves up the driveway through the side door into the kitchen. They give you a couple pieces of candy, and then you weave around in the living room. And in the living room, sitting in his recliner, is the old man of the house. And the old man's got a backgammon board out with a pair of dice, and he's literally playing craps with each of the
Wow.
kids, and like playing a round of craps, and like you could play up to win $1. And if you kept rolling to win $1, like he was doing it in increments, you'd win $1. If you lost, you lost, and then you left. And so he was basically sitting there playing craps with all of the kids in the
That's
neighborhood,
amazing.
sitting in his lounger as they just made their way through his kitchen into his living room and out the front door. And that was literally like his Halloween tradition. And I just thought that, I grew up in that, and growing up in a time where my little league team was sponsored by the Blue Velvet Lounge was just totally like a 70s type of thing,
That
playing
is like
craps with
so
the kids
70s, so
and
Bad News Bears.
the Blue Velvet Lounge. Yeah, and we won the championship, so
Well,
there
there
you
you
go.
go.
So on behalf of the Blue Velvet Lounge, if you're still out there in Cleveland, Ohio, hat tip to you. And on behalf of Mark Schofield and myself, we wish you and your family a happy Halloween. May your kids get all the candy corn or anything other than candy corn that they want. And we wish you a good week.